Good evening. Good evening, everyone. My name is Alan Duckworth. I work for the Town of Brookhaven as an environmental analyst, and we're just going to wait a few seconds just to allow more people to join this meeting. Okay, good evening. Yes, my name is Alan Duckworth. I work for the Town of Brookhaven as an environmental analyst, and on behalf of the town, I'd like to welcome you all to our second public meeting on the town's Local Waterfront Revitalization Program, an LWRP. For the town's South Shore, including Great South Bay and Richards Bay, and including Fire Island. Now, an LWRP, it's a comprehensive planning document that has many goals, including increasing public access to the waterfront, to make the South Shore a more enjoyable and easier place for all of us to visit. An LWRP will also help promote coastal resiliency, to strengthen the South Shore against coastal storms, flooding, sea level rise. An LWRP will also help reduce any conflict, say between commercial and recreational users. And an LWRP will also make the South Shore a healthier place to live, not just for us, but for our wildlife as well. Now, an LWRP, it's the town's LWRP is partially funded by New York State Department of State. It's a massive multi-year long project, too large for the town to do it by itself. So we have brought together a fantastic team who you'll meet very soon. But before I hand over, I just want to emphasize two things. The ultimate goal of the town's LWRP is to make the South Shore a better place to live, work, and play. But for the town to achieve that, we need your help. So the second thing I want to emphasize is that during this meeting or after this meeting, please provide your feedback, your input, and your comments. So again, I welcome you to this second public meeting. I hope you find it an enjoyable and productive meeting. And I would like to introduce Barbara Kendall from the Department of State.
Hi, everyone. I'm Barbara Kendall, and I'm a coastal resources specialist with the Department of State, based in Albany, but I actually live in Dutchess County, so I'm halfway there where I live. And I work with the Town of Brookhaven on LWRP, as well as other communities on Long Island and throughout the state. As Alan said, we provided a grant to the town to support the funding of the LWRP. And I also provide technical assistance as the project is going along with the requirements and what's needed to get to the finish line for the LWRP.
Great. Thank you, Barbara. I am Jackie Hakes from MJ Engineering, and I am going to take it from here. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. I'm going to walk through what to expect tonight in terms of our presentation and the session with you this evening. So we are going through a few introductions at the beginning, and then we're going to walk through a webinar how-to. We are anticipating several interactive questions where we can have an opportunity to get input from you, and we're very much looking forward to that. So we're going to walk through how to do that. We then will provide a little more overview of the Local Waterfront Revitalization Program, or the LWRP. And that is an acronym you are going to hear us say a lot this evening, the LWRP. We then will talk about the Waterfront Revitalization Area Boundary, or the WRA. And then we're going to get into what we hope is the heart of the discussion this evening, which is an introduction of proposed projects for the South Shore Local Waterfront Revitalization Program. And we intend to then share with you some next steps, which, as Alan had indicated, also include opportunities for you to share additional thoughts and information and ideas with all of us about the LWRP proposed projects. And we will break at the end to allow for an opportunity for Q&A or for you to provide additional input. I do want to take the time to introduce the Waterfront Advisory Committee, or the WAC. The town has put together a wide range of people and representatives of various different affiliations and organizations to help guide this process, along with Alan as the town project manager and Barbara serving as the technical advisor from the Department of State. So we do have Alan, along with a series of other individuals. I'm just going to quickly name them. Alexi Romero, Allison Bronco, Anthony Powell, Charles Flagg, Howard Myers Esquire, Jeremy Campbell, Jessica Zenka-Warris, Johnny Paynes, Kevin Malloy, Paul McCormick, Paul Pontieri Jr., Marion Russo, and Susie Goldhirsch. And we want to thank those WAC members because they are volunteering in their efforts for that. Also, again, Barbara is our state partner, providing technical guidance and assistance from the Department of State, in addition to funding for this effort. And joining us from the consultant team today, MJ Engineering is the lead consultant for this, but we are not working alone on this effort. We are happy to have with us several of our team members joining us this evening. From MJ Engineering, we have Sarah and Nora joining us. From Bay Environmental, we have Andrew. And from Andropogon this evening, we have Darren, Todd, and Abigail. We also have a team member, Captain Consultant, who is not joining us this evening, but is very much a part of the effort. We did want to share a little bit about the schedule and what has been completed and what has been done to date through this planning process. And then also share with you what to expect moving forward before we dive too far into this evening. So the process started in June of 2022, in the spring of 2022, and our team started with an inventory and analysis. In June of 2022, we held several stakeholder group meetings. We did have our first public information session. We held 2 in-person sessions, one in the eastern end of the study area, one in the western side of the study area, to try to solicit public input. Through the summer, we held an online community survey, again, another opportunity to gather input from the community. We've been keeping the town board updated, and we started talking about proposed land and water uses and projects within the waterfront area. And I'm going to talk about what that area is in just a moment. We have continued that discussion, working with the town, working with the Waterfront Advisory Committee, working with various stakeholders, as well as our team, to develop those proposed land and water projects, which we will be sharing with you this evening. As part of this process, a harbor management plan will also be developed, and so that is in process. And here we are, spring of 2023. The draft LWRP is in the process of being prepared, and we're holding the second public information meeting to gather additional input from you. We will then continue to draft the LWRP document, and there will be a third public meeting to continue to gather input prior to finalization of the effort. So how can you participate? I did indicate there will be a Q&A at the end. But we also have several interactive polling questions throughout the duration of the presentation today, and we'd really love for you to participate. We will break, as I said, to address questions at the end. We'll review this again when we get to that point, but you can utilize the Q&A function in your Zoom webinar so that you can add your comments and questions and thoughts in so that we will be able to address those at the end. And if you're on the phone, you can also use the raise the hand feature when we do get to the end of the presentation today. I also want to point out that a recording of this evening, as well as previous materials and information, meeting summaries, etc., are available on the town website. And the link is there on your screen. There is a specific page devoted to the Local Waterfront Revitalization Program. And if you are not familiar with this effort, I would encourage you to visit that link and take a look at what has been done up to this point. So with that, we would like to understand a little bit more about who is joining us this evening. So we want to get to know you a little bit. So this is our first series of participant polls. And if you have a smartphone or smart device, you can hover over the QR code and that'll take you right where you need to go. Or you can go to pollev.com/MJPlanning518. Or you can text MJ Planning 518 to 37607. All right, so I'm going to give everybody just a moment to be able to kind of log into this first poll. All right, so again, you can scan that QR code on your screen right now. Go to pollev.com/MJPlanning518. Text MJ Planning 518 to 37607. All right, so here's our first question. Who is joining us this evening? We'd like to know, are you a town resident full-time? Are you a seasonal resident? A property owner or business owner in the town? Do you utilize the waterfront? And you can select more than one. Are you a visitor? Do you work in the town? I want to give folks just a moment to get logged in and provide their responses. Okay. So looks like 73% of you joining us are town residents. 9% of you also work in the town, and 18% have selected other. All right, so now we want to understand how you heard about this virtual public workshop. This is helpful as we are looking to schedule that third public meeting in terms of how to gather the most participation and how to make people aware of what's going on. Okay, it looks like the majority joining heard through a town email. Others heard through word of mouth and social media. Okay, that's helpful. All right, we'd also like to know, how familiar are you with a local waterfront revitalization program, or the LWRP? Okay, so right now we're pretty split in terms of folks may have heard about it or somewhat familiar, and others not familiar at all. Okay. Next, we'd like to understand, those of you that are joining us, did you have an opportunity to participate in the waterfront survey that that occurred last summer? So that was June through August of 2022. Okay. So nearly 70% did not. Well, we're very glad you're here today. And 31% did. All right, here's another question for you. So the Southshore Waterfront area can have a variety of both environmental as well as economic benefits. We'd like to understand which of the following is most important to you. Is it economic development, ecosystem habitat preservation, public health, recreation, shoreline protection, tourism, water quality? Okay, so it looks like, I'll let folks give another minute, but it looks like the majority have selected ecosystem habitat preservation and then shoreline protection. All right. Well, I want to thank you all for participating. We really appreciate that. It's helpful for us to know. And hopefully this next section of the presentation will be beneficial, particularly for those that may not be as familiar with an LWRP. So we are going to walk through what an LWRP is, what the benefits are, what's involved in the planning process, and then what it means to implement the LWRP. So Alan gave a really wonderful overview of what an LWRP is and why the town is engaged in that. I'm going to reinforce that a little bit and talk and expand on that a little bit. So it is ultimately a land and water use plan. It's a strategy. It also includes a strategy to implement that plan. It can address everything from development within the waterfront area, waterfront access, protecting natural and cultural resources, as well as erosion and flooding. The benefits of an LWRP are numerous. It can attract appropriate development if that is something that is important to the community and the town. It can protect the waterfront and other valuable resources to the community. It also provides an opportunity for the town to be potentially eligible for funding to implement portions of the LWRP. Through the process itself, there's an opportunity to establish consensus, and it also creates long-term partnerships, not only among state agencies, but also community-based organizations, neighborhood organizations, and other partners that may be involved in the waterfront area. And ultimately, it does provide a comprehensive framework for decision-making. An additional benefit of the LWRP is that once an LWRP is in place, and that means it's been approved by the town board, approved by the Secretary of State, and approved by the Federal Office of Coastal Management, actions within your LWRP area or your waterfront revitalization area must be consistent with your LWRP. So if you as a town have said this is what is important to us within our waterfront area, it gets included in your LWRP, then future actions must be consistent with that. And those three boxes you see there are the various levels of review that allow for those actions to be evaluated to make sure they're consistent. The planning process includes the formation of a waterfront advisory committee, which we've introduced earlier this evening. It also includes the review of previous planning efforts. The town of Brookhaven has done a substantial amount of previous planning efforts, and so we want to understand what has been done already and what might still be important to be done. We also conducted an inventory and analysis of local resources, everything from your water resources and slopes to sea level rise, etc. And we also are preparing required sections. I'm going to talk through what those are within the document itself. And ultimately, it will include, we hope, the town acceptance of a draft of the LWRP. That will be followed by a public review period. And then the final version of the LWRP will incorporate those public comments, because it's important that the community support the LWRP document. Ultimately, the town board will adopt the LWRP and any subsequent local laws that might help to implement that. The Department of State will conduct a legal review, and then ultimately the Secretary of State and the Federal Office of Coastal Management will hopefully approve the document. So this is just a brief list of the required components of an LWRP, just to show you how they all work together. So there's an identification of the waterfront area boundary, that inventory and analysis that I talked about. There's a review of something called the waterfront revitalization policies. New York State has a set of 44 coastal policies that get incorporated into the local waterfront revitalization program. And that is an important piece of this LWRP. The proposed land and water uses and projects, that is what we're talking about tonight in terms of proposed projects. There's also a section that talks about how the town will be implementing the LWRP, as well as federal and state actions and programs that might affect the implementation of that. And in addition to that, the local commitment and consultation, and then compliance with something called SECRA, or the State Environmental Quality Review Act. Now, that's a lot of information I'm giving to you right now, but what I think is important to understand is this, this graphic to the left of your screen. Each of these sections, while it might seem a linear process, it is not a linear process. Each of these sections are interrelated, and one section informs the next. And it's important to be able to understand that as we're going through this process. And I think as we start to share some of the proposed projects with you, you can also see several of those projects are interrelated as well. So implementing the LWRP can take on a number of forms. As we get to the proposed projects, when we explain what some of those proposed projects are, you'll see some of them might be capital projects, or what I like to call bricks and mortar projects that can be built and constructed. Some of the proposed projects to implement the LWRP might in fact be feasibility studies or identify additional planning efforts needed. It is also important to note that the implementation of the LWRP can include applying for grants to help fund either some of these studies or these capital program projects. It could also be implemented through local land use controls like zoning or local laws. And also the implementation is ongoing. As I mentioned, local actions within your waterfront revitalization area do require a review for consistency with your LWRP, should the LWRP be adopted. And then ultimately, it should be an ongoing process to update the LWRP. So we do want to talk a little bit about that waterfront revitalization area, so you understand what are we talking about in terms of the geography for this local waterfront revitalization program. So the WRA, or the Waterfront Revitalization Area, for coastal communities is already established by default. And ultimately, it is that area that falls between the New York coastal area boundary and the municipal boundary, which is the water side. Now, with that said, through this process, the town can propose to modify that boundary to better fit its needs and to better address its waterfront and protect its waterfront. I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. But what does it mean to be within a WRA? Well, funding opportunities for any proposed projects have to be located within the WRA. Or rather, proposed projects have to be within the WRA in order to be eligible for funding. And then any actions that might be taking place within your WRA would be subject to that consistency review. So here's the proposed WRA, working with the town, working with the Waterfront Advisory Committee. It was determined that yes, the town would be proposing to modify its waterfront revitalization area. So what you see here, and give me just a moment. So if you can follow my red cursor here, this purple area is the current coastal boundary to the north. This is the land side. What is being proposed is to extend that up to north to Sunrise Highway. The east and west extents are the town boundary, the town municipal boundary. The southern extent is 1,500 feet south of Fire Island. And I do also want to point out that the town has identified in the proposed waterfront revitalization area boundary to include the Carmens River, the Swan River, and the Patchogue River, recognizing that what's happening upstream does have an impact within the waterfront area. Okay. So just to give you some idea in terms of some numbers, the total town of Brookhaven is just under 327,000 acres or 510 square miles. The waterfront revitalization area for the South Shore is proposed to be just under 126,000 acres or 196 square miles. Okay, so now let's get into the heart of the conversation. I hope that that overview is helpful for those of you that are joining us that aren't as familiar with the study that is ongoing right now. And I would again encourage you, if you want to learn more and get more detail about the program, please visit that webpage on the town website. Okay, so we are going to dive into the proposed project. The proposed land and water projects will serve to implement the LWRP. Throughout this process, many projects have been identified that can help to implement and further what the town's vision is for the waterfront. And ultimately, inclusion of these proposed projects within your LWRP will enhance the competitiveness and the likeliness of a successful grant application, at least for various state funding sources. And I mentioned this prior, but I'll mention it again. The proposed projects must be located within that waterfront revitalization area boundary. And I do also want to point out that the identification of proposed projects this evening, and even in the LWRP document itself, when that is finalized, does not necessarily mean all of these projects are going to happen or that they're all going to happen at once. It means that there is a plan in place over time for the town to implement as they have funding available and as it's appropriate moving forward. So the development of these proposed projects is based on input received from the public prior to this evening. We've had work sessions with your elected officials, specifically with those ward representatives within the South Shore area. Input received from the Waterfront Advisory Committee. We've also had numerous work sessions with the town staff. Our existing conditions evaluation and tours of areas within the waterfront revitalization area boundary have also helped to inform the development of these proposed projects. And then ultimately, we've coupled that with our project team experience with coastal communities. In particular, some of our team members have very specific Long Island South Shore community experience, and with our experience with the Local Waterfront Revitalization Program itself. To help set the stage a little bit for these proposed projects, we wanted to share some online survey highlights. And this is from that summer 2022 survey that I think maybe about 40% of you had identified. So we asked the question, what are the key challenges that you see for the waterfront area? And this is a representation of the number of times some of these key themes were identified. The larger the text that you see on your screen on the left, the more times that this was mentioned. And when we look at this and decipher this, the key themes identified from those participating in that survey last summer were flooding and sea level rise, water quality and pollution, public waterfront access, sewers, and development and zoning. And I think when we asked some of the questions earlier of you, there were several of you that had identified, flooding, sea level, shoreline protection to address flooding, and then also habitat protection. And when we talk about water quality, that has a direct impact on habitat in many instances. We also asked about some opportunities within the waterfront area. And again, the larger the font size on the left, the higher number of mentions in the survey responses. And so the key themes that we learned from the survey respondents are public access improvements. And this was kind of across the board, from beach access to fishing access to small watercraft, sewer capacity improvements, resiliency, living shorelines, protection from flooding, seeing some repetitiveness here, nature preserves trails, and then walking and biking paths. So this is the type of information we were learning from you as a community and folding in with our efforts and work sessions with the WAC in the town. We also got some additional comments, things like safety and upkeep of our waterfront communities, stronger town presence at marinas and beaches, again, maintaining regularly with lighting those areas that are accessible to the public. We also heard some other thoughts with regard to shellfish and seagrass restoration, things like art along the way from Main Street to the waterfront. This is in the Patchogue area. And then also the use of things like native planting species to limit environmentally harmful activities. So that's the type of information that helped to inform what we're going to share with you this evening. So we do have a series of proposed projects we're going to walk through with you this evening, ask your thoughts through that online polling that you've already gotten some experience with, and then get your input. All of the efforts that we took to develop these proposed projects, the proposed projects started to take shape into 5 categories. So we're going to talk about water quality projects, living resources projects, public waterfront access, resilience, educational, and institutional partnerships. And I do want to point out, similar to the various sections within the LWRP document itself, many of these categories and many of the projects within these categories are interrelated. Let's face it, in a lot of these instances, we're talking about natural systems, and those natural systems depend on one another and are very interrelated. So we tried to identify the appropriate category for these projects, but recognize there are certainly overlaps within these. And I do want to point out, as we walk through this, I'm going to bring in our team members, Andrew from Bay Environmental, as well as Darren from Andropogon, to assist in explaining further some of these proposed projects. But to start with, we're going to go with water quality. So you can see there are several proposed projects related to water quality. The first one is proposed is a water quality monitoring program. And this is really targeted to identifying existing data, because we recognize there are other partners that are currently doing this, and making sure that the data that's being collected is something that can help the town moving forward. Another proposed program is the Wetlands, Ponds, and Waterways Inventory and Restoration. So again, and this would include an assessment of what exists and prioritizing ways to be able to improve upon what is currently there. We also have a stormwater input to the Coastal Environment Program. So looking at ways to be able to identify infrastructure that can address the stormwater runoff during storm events. Looking at increasing the adoption of innovative and alternative wastewater treatment systems. So this is something that has been brought up on numerous occasions with regard to the impact on water quality. And so looking at ways to perhaps incentivize or educate people about these alternative systems. Town-owned comfort stations and restrooms upgrades. So looking to inventory and assess where they are and what improvements might be appropriate. Review the existing aquaculture program and conduct a feasibility study for expansion of that program. So identifying what's working and where it might make sense to expand. And then expanding the Bay Constable program. So perhaps building on a partnership with the town of Southampton, looking at ways to expand that presence and to improve upon that program. So I just gave a very high level overview of some of the proposed projects for the water quality. At this point, I would like to turn it over to Andrew from Bay Environmental to expand on some of the key proposed projects. So Andrew, I'm going to hand it over to you to share a little bit more.
So I'm Andrew Thyberg, Bay Environmental. We are an environmental consulting firm located on the South Shore of Long Island. We help with the inventory and the proposed projects related to the environment. So Jackie kind of gave a quick overview. We have like high level projects. We have some that are more specific, but we kind of group these into different programs that involve planning stages, especially with like restoration type projects. You don't want to just go forward and try to do something without understanding, a baseline of what you're dealing with. So, with the wetlands and pond and waterway inventory restoration program, there are countless, wetlands, ponds, and waterways throughout the South Shore. And, if we were to go and just restore one, we might be, not using our resources effectively and knowing which ones are the worst off, where we can get our, the most impact. So while we have identified several specific projects, some of which have been given through the community outreach that we've done. And some of those projects are a little more ready to go, so to speak, but we didn't want to make anything too specific because, we don't necessarily have a handle on every pond and wetland that has issues. So we kept most of our programs more high level so that we weren't, being too specific within our LWRP. As everyone on the call probably knows, water quality is quite an issue in the Great South Bay and Mauritius Bay, and we're looking at ways where we can improve that. And obviously water quality monitoring, which is being done by multiple agencies, and there's tons of effort going on. But one of the programs will be to kind of pull that together, see what gaps we have, and also any implementation of a program that looks at improving water quality. We want to make sure we measure that so we can understand the effectiveness and the success of that. The aquaculture is related to water quality and also to like living resources. And we know it's been rather successful, but we suggest that we look at any issues, lessons learned there, and look at potentially expanding it, and obviously understanding that we need to balance the multiple different users that use the bay and our water systems, make sure everybody's happy.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. And I do want to point out to folks that following this presentation this evening and the input we received from you this evening, there is an online proposed project questionnaire that's available. And at the end, Nora's going to walk us through that. But there is more detail about each of these proposed projects within that questionnaire, so that you can take the time to kind of digest what Andrew's just talked through and the rest of what we're talking through this evening.
And I'll just add that it's not a final list either. So
yes.
Any information or potential suggestions, we'd be happy to look into.
Thank you, Andrew. So we do want to hear from you and just get your initial reactions. I know that there isn't a lot of time for you to have digest what we just talked through, but we'd like to go back to that participant poll. If you've already scanned and participated in the earlier polls, you should be set to go, but you can just hover over the QR code, text NJ Planning 518 to 37607 and participate. But we would like to understand, of those projects that were just introduced to you, which is the most important to you? Is it the water quality monitoring program, the wetlands pond waterway inventory restoration, stormwater program, the increased adoption of innovative wastewater treatment systems, the comfort stations, the aquaculture program expansion, or the Bay Constable program? Okay, we'll give folks a few minutes to get their thoughts in. Right now, it looks like the water quality monitoring program and the stormwater program are really fairly important to those that are participating, as well as the wetland pond waterway inventory and restoration. Right now, it looks pretty even. So yeah, it looks like those top three for those of you joining us are the water quality monitoring program, the stormwater program, and the wetland ponds and waterways. Also of mention are the comfort station upgrades, as well as the aquaculture program. We also want to understand, do you have other ideas that you want to share with us this evening? You can feel free to type in your thoughts and your ideas, and they will show up on the screen live. So we are, really curious to get your ideas and your thoughts for other water quality projects. And if you don't have other ideas, like I said, there will be a questionnaire you can participate in. All right, so plan specifically for remediation of leachate plumes from the landfill. Okay. All right, other ideas, sewer. Okay. What about the deer wildlife? Okay. All right, dredging. Hold that thought. Sewer. Other thoughts, ideas? Okay. Lots of ideas for addressing the sewer, reducing algal blooms, using natural ways to remove nitrogen, expanding kelp growing, introducing more shellfish, improving sewer systems, connecting communities, plan for the storm drains to close the bay that directly connect the waterways, fertilizer runoff, bad smell. Okay, 370. Oh, I think somebody's trying to log into this. That's our text code. Education and outreach to communities. Okay. All right, we'll give folks just another couple of seconds, and then we're going to move into the living resources category of projects. Okay. All right, parking locations. Okay, that might come up in the accessibility. Strict rests for boaters. Okay. All right. All right, so we're going to move on. You will have more opportunities to share your ideas for some of the other project categories as we move on. So next up, we have the living resources categories, or category rather. So again, quite a list of potential proposed projects. Some of these could very well be directly related to water quality. Some also could be related to the resiliency category. But for this evening's purposes, we've identified under living resources. So the first is the Marine Ecological Survey and Shellfish Seagrass Restoration Program. So that's the proposed project is to conduct a comprehensive inventory and condition assessment of these resources and identify what might need to happen to create that restoration program. As Andrew said, it's important to understand what is there and what's happening before moving forward with a program. Next, the living wetlands, ponds, and waterways. That was actually identified previously, so we've already talked about that. Upland habitat preservation and restoration. So this is really looking at opportunities to acquire upland parcels to develop buffering and habitat. So this would require a lot of coordination and partnership. But this would provide opportunities to create stormwater management in green infrastructure areas. Also proposed is a rare, threatened, or endangered, or RTE, shorebird monitoring program. So this would involve identifying locations where these rare, threatened, or endangered species might be, and identifying opportunities to enhance the habitat. The Living Shorelines Program. So this would be looking at developing policies and encouraging opportunities to create more living shorelines versus hardened shorelines. Also an invasive species management plan. So, pardon me, developing a policy that really discourages non-native species. Finfish habitat improvements. So again, identifying locations for passages, for example, and identifying ways to expand the program to improve habitat for finfish. And then former duck farm mitigation. So utilizing existing studies that may have already been done to identify and inventory and assess what is currently happening with former duck farms in ways that any impacts can be mitigated. So that's a high-level overview. Andrew, I'm going to turn it over to you to share a little bit more with regard to living resources.
Sure. So first off, for living resources and also water quality, I want to make it clear that the town is already been undertaking a lot of these in some fashion or another. We're more formalizing them we're identifying them as specific proposed projects that we want to, include in our LWRP to achieve the goals of the town. And that'll open us up to, funding opportunities. So the marine ecology survey, the town has been doing like shellfish population surveys in the past, hasn't been done consistently. So we're proposing it's more systematic and consistently done so that we have a good status condition of our shellfish, eelgrass beds, and the overall ecological health of the bays. And then from that, identify means in which we could do some type of restoration, whether it be sanctuaries or increasing more aquaculture related projects to help improve the ecological health by also they filter out improve water quality. We talked about the wetlands in the restoration on the previous slide, but still very related. And upland habitat restoration, which is there already are existing programs to funding mechanisms to acquire land. One of the issues is that open space preservation is you're very limited in what you can do on that type of when you purchase the property through the existing funding mechanism. So we're looking at alternatives. So we could, this could be done on, habitat preservation restoration could be done on existing land that's owned by the town, but it could also be used to acquire new land, and it could be potentially turned into a passive park or be utilized for some type of stormwater restoration infrastructure, such as bioswales or other kind of green solutions that require a lot of space, but are still, more green and, they're not hardened structures or anything. And then, just going to skip down for time purposes. Living shorelines, we're looking at mostly along like the Fire Island side. There has been severe erosion issues. It's a problem in many places, but living shorelines are different from hardened shorelines in that they could be a wetland, they could be oyster reefs or some form of riprap that provides some habitat. And it's a relatively newer field, so there's not that much. A lot of it's going to be requiring careful planning. We're looking at teaming with Fire Island National Seashore, who's very interested in this as well. The town shorelines are mostly private property that have these issues. Fire Island National Seashore has several sensitive habitats that are in danger of due to erosion. So we're looking for a partnership there. Maybe we can learn some things as we go along. And just want to mention finfish habitat. The town has already completed some fish passages where they're opening up previously dammed upland waterways that were our spawning grounds for alewives and eels, and they're having some great success. So we're looking to help further that program, but also look to identify other ways in which we can improve finfish habitat for the South Shore bays.
Great, thank you, Andrew.
You're welcome.
And similar to the water quality, we'd like to understand from you what you think is most important. So you should, hopefully all the folks that have already logged on here, and we're going to go ahead and ask of the living resources proposed projects, which do you think is most important? So we've got the Upland Habitat and Restoration Program, Living Shorelines Program, Finfish Habitat. All right, those are definitely kind of taking the lead in terms of, for those joining us, what you think is important. We'll give folks a little more time to get an opportunity to share their thoughts. All right, so that ecological survey and shellfish seagrass restoration program also, as well as the wetland pond waterway restoration. Okay, but it looks like by far the Living Shorelines program is very important to those that are joining us this evening. And similar to our last category, we'd like to ask you, what other ideas do you have for the living resources? We recognize there might be some overlap again with the water quality piece, but we'd love to hear your thoughts if you want to type in your thoughts. Okay, oysters. Okay. Yeah. What other thoughts do you have for the living resources project, proposed project category? Okay. Oysters it is. There we go. Coconut shell casings, okay. All right, we'll give folks just another few seconds to get some ideas. Okay, long-term care do. Okay, seeding. So many things, but please don't allow straight cutting of the marsh. Okay, let nature do its own cut. Okay. Okay. So we'll give folks just another moment to see if there's anything else with regard to the living resources based on your initial thoughts. All right, so we will then move on to public waterfront access. So the public waterfront access proposed projects are organized a little bit differently than what the living resources and the water quality projects have been as they've been explained to you. So as our team started working with the town and the WAC, it really became clear that there were three types of access that really made sense within the waterfront area. Primary access, which includes direct improvements of expansion to the waterfront, so direct access to the waterfront itself. Secondary access, which is more inland access that might help people to get to that primary access. So inland access that could also be via bike or non-motorized vehicle. And then tertiary access. And this we are looking at as signage and wayfinding. So helping people understand how to access these key points within the waterfront area. And there are several specific locations that have been identified through the process so far. And to expand a little bit more on that, I'm going to turn it over to Darren, one of our team members who's going to talk us through this a little bit more. So Darren, I'll turn it over to you and just let me know when you'd like me to advance to the next slide, please.
Sure. Thanks, Jackie. So I think one of the things you'll notice here, talk about the primary access points, is that all of them are existing places, sort of existing amenities within your community. And the reason for that is pretty simple, in that there's very limited real estate available in your community. So the approach that we took is really taking a look at a lot of these existing amenities and parks and beaches, you know, within the town, and trying to find opportunities and relationships with either adjacent properties or adjacent town facilities like libraries to, you know, use for potential parking, but basically trying to look for efficiencies, maybe increase the bandwidth so that more people could use these spaces during those seasons where they get their most intense use. So for example, if you look at Blue Point Dock, I think most people are probably familiar with where this is. One of the opportunities we looked for this particular location is there is just to the west, there is some open space that's currently owned by the DEC. So the question is can the town build a relationship with the DEC, come up with a potential agreement where we can expand the footprint of the park itself, so that you expand the different types of uses that particular dock right now can accommodate. Again, using that as an example, parking is always something that we consider when making these sorts of recommendations. So, you know, is there an opportunity for that particular project to use, you know, the Bayport Blue Point Public Library just up the street, you know, build a relationship there where off hours of the library potentially can be used for parking for the dock itself or the expanded park in that area. So looking for those synergies between agencies that might own a property adjacent to, or even, you know, public amenities, town-owned amenities like libraries or other opportunities to use for parking and things like that. Shirley Beach is another good example in that it does have a lot of existing infrastructure in terms of parking, in terms of, you know, restroom facilities, you know, the playground area. I think the difference with that one is the Manor of St. George, which is directly north, is a recently acquired property. So what that is that looking at that as becoming a sort of more a unified premier space for people to use for outdoor, recreation in that area in particular. With the Shirley Marina, looking for opportunities with the county to expand the use there. Webby's Beach is again very similar to Shirley in that there is existing infrastructure there in terms of parking, playground, beach area. Can we look at making that slightly more efficient? Looking for opportunities to expand where possible. And I would say the same about Havens Point. There's limited, that's a fairly small space, but looking for opportunities to make efficiencies and build synergies with the open space that's directly adjacent to it. So as far as the secondary access is concerned, what we were really looking for there is building on existing infrastructure. The one exception to that would be one of the things we found is that right now, if you look at the current bikeway configuration, is that there's fairly good access on a north-south axis. But when you start looking at east-west connectivity, we saw a deficiency there. So is there an opportunity along the Montauk Highway to build in a bike corridor there that begins to connect to some of the pre-existing north-south connections that actually lead down to the water's edge? So making improvements, to those existing bikeways where needed to as well for the north-south. There's also this, this notion of making roadway improvements, at the waterfront. So building, whether that might be traffic calming or other mechanisms to make roadway improvements or make conditions a little bit safer for cyclists and pedestrians. And then last but not least is, non-motorized craft launches. And that the one example of that I think is Carmen's River and the Blue Way there, and sort of building on that idea. I will say we are still looking for opportunities to create more sort of pocket parks where we can introduce those small craft launches for canoes and kayaks. So with respect to the feedback that's going to follow, I think we'd very much look for feedback from the community in terms of other opportunities for that. So Jackie, if you want to go to the next slide, that's sort of a good demonstration of where these sort of projects are located within the town. And one of the things that we really tried to focus on is creating sort of a wider distribution, sort of an equitable distribution of these projects. So a lot of different folks within the community don't have to travel sort of east-west across the entire town to get to one public amenity or another. We've tried to create sort of equally distributed opportunities and amenities throughout the town. So I think that's a really important point to make. So with that, I will turn it back over to Jackie.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Darren. Appreciate that. So Darren has shared a little bit about some of the proposed public access projects. Now we'd like to, I think you're starting to understand kind of how we're going through this evening. We'd like to get some feedback from you on these in particular. So let's jump right into it. So of those proposed projects that have just been introduced to you, what do you think is most important? Okay, the Shirley Beach Manor of St. George, as well as the Shirley Marina Park, Montauk Highway as an east-west bike corridor, non-motorized craft launches inland, Blue Point Dock. All right. We'll give folks a few moments to get their thoughts in. So it looks like the Shirley Marina Park and non-motorized craft launches inland are important. Improved bike lanes to the waterfront also. Okay. All right, folks, now we're going to go on to the next question for you. What other types of public access improvements would you like to see? This could be a wide range, everything from, bike access, walking, non-motorized watercraft, like kayaks, etc. What are your thoughts? All right, more formal kayak launches, perhaps rentals or free options, more boat ramps, close Montauk Highway to vehicular traffic. Oh, that's an interesting one. That certainly would change some things. Bold thinking. All right, walking. What other thoughts do you have with regard to public access improvements? Okay, walking paths, right? Pocket park near Cranberry Dock on already partially developed land. Oh, by Violet's Cove, okay. There's a lot happening there. Trails near wetlands, but not disturbing wildlife. More hiking trails, safe walking paths. All right, we'll give folks another few seconds to get any additional thoughts in. And then we've got one more question for you with regard to the public access. Signage about natural things to try not to damage. So kind of an educational component with regard to signage. You know, Darren, I think that might get to that tertiary kind of wayfinding signage opportunity. Okay. All right, so we're going to go on to the next question with regard to this. And we want to ask you specifically, where would you like to see these public access improvements? We did kind of get some of your thoughts on that in the previous question. You know, we want to, as Darren said, we want to make sure that, you know, the improvements identified and what's represented in the LWRP, you know, span the full geography of this waterfront revitalization area. So Mastic, okay. Other specific locations that may not have been identified already, Bellport, Brookhaven Hamlet. Okay, along the rivers, okay. Roads leading to the Narrows Bay that are dead-ended, okay. The Mastic Beach waterfront, so much protection needed there. The Carmen River, Browns River, okay. Yeah. Rivers in general. So that might be an opportunity for some of those inland kind of secondary access points. Okay. Miramar Beach, rivers. Okay. All right, we'll give folks a few more seconds. Pollutant removals. Okay. The Shirley side of the bay. All right. All right, we'll give folks just another couple of moments, and then we're going to move on to the next category of proposed projects. So the next category is resilience. One of the things about the resilience category is you will see there does not seem to be as many projects proposed here, but as I've said before, there's so much interrelationship between all of these proposed projects, particularly the water quality and the living resources. You know, in some instances, some of those living resources category projects will serve to create a more resilient waterfront and a more resilient shoreline. But we have identified two within this category, including the enhancements and creation of natural features, specifically for flood and storm protection, as well as a dredging program. And I think somebody had mentioned that earlier in your response and your input with regard to some of the water quality projects. With this, I'm going to turn it over to Andrew to walk us through a little bit more about these projects as they're currently proposed. So Andrew, you are back up.
Hello. So for the natural features for flood protection and storm protection, we're looking at nature-based features mostly, which are pretty much mimicking things like marshes or upland berms. And the town is actually in the process of creating a similar system out in Mastic Beach at Violet's Cove. And it's actually now a partnership with the Army Corps of Engineers, who we should all be happy is planning on spending a ton of money to help with storm and flood protection on the island. So that's now a joint project to help protect flooding and also do some tidal wetland enhancement. So we're suggesting that they develop a program to look at where this could be done, And a lot of this is being done at the federal level. So the plan is to kind of strengthen that partnership, understand where the Army Corps or our higher level agencies are going to be working, be involved in that process, and potentially have our own that we find important that slip through the cracks, so to speak. And another part of this too would be to monitor some of our existing natural features, such as our Fire Island Beach Dune and similar systems. And while the Army Corps does, protect, maintain that for the most part, the town is planning on overseeing, trends and understanding shoreline changes. And then this information can be relayed to the Army Corps. Being more prepared can help us, potentially receive additional, attention or funding related to these kind of flood protection programs. And then with dredging, if you are a boater or go down to the shoreline, you probably know that dredging is needed very desperately throughout the South Shore. The town historically has not really played a large role in dredging. It's done at the federal and at the county level mostly. However, there are several areas that really need it. So we decided that it makes sense to develop this program and it'll cover many different benefits. One of which would be there's certain locations that creeks are being choked off. So we're really looking at just opening them up, but also in the accessibility and safety kind of concerns regarding dredging, where we might help with developing like a comprehensive needs assessment to hand this off to different agencies and say, listen, we really need it. And taking it further steps like going through the permitting process, the sampling. It's a very long process and it's difficult to get these types of permits in place. So the town can look at, kind of handing this off on a silver platter, like we're ready, we'd like your help. So we're looking at partnerships in that aspect too. And also within this program, we could potentially start having the town fund their own dredging projects if it gets to that point.
Excellent. Thank you, Andrew. Appreciate that. So folks, we do want to ask you about your thoughts with regard to the resilience category. So we'll go right to it. What other ideas do you have for resiliency projects? And we will give folks a little bit of time to get their thoughts in. And it's okay if your thoughts may be something that you might have already identified with some of the other categories, recognizing the overlap. Okay, partnerships with local groups. House raising along creeks beyond the Massac Beach pilot program. Okay, South Breeze Drive, Beaver Dam Creek entrance opening, green infrastructure along the roadways, something to help address the stormwater, retreating from the water edges, especially for emergency facilities, very much a resiliency consideration. Okay, other thoughts with regard to resiliency projects? Okay. All right. So we're going to go ahead and move on to the next category. In just a moment, there's a slight delay. Okay. So the final category of proposed projects we're going to talk with you about this evening are educational and institutional partnerships. So I very much appreciate the comment previously about expanding and identifying those partnerships. So we've identified a couple of potential projects that can, establish, strengthen, create partnerships. One is a marine debris program, which could create an opportunity to partner with the community through an education program, and an opportunity to partner with other entities and organizations that are already working within the waterfront area and building upon some of those and maybe establishing routine cleanups, et cetera. Also, a proposed project is a boater education and outreach program. Again, more of an educational type of program, helping people understand what the impacts might be within the waterfront area and within the bays, and really helping to educate boaters with regard to opportunities to improve and help protect the waterfront area. So these are a couple of the partnerships. I do want to say that we have been working with the Waterfront Advisory Committee, and there have been some additional discussions about additional partnerships with local institutions of higher education, such as Stony Brook, as well as other state agencies, and as Andrew had mentioned, some of those other partnering agencies. So this we fully expect will be expanding, but this is what we are proposing at this point. And we would like to ask you for other ideas. So here we go. We'd like to ask you for other partnership ideas that you might have. Are there other organizations, neighborhood organizations or entities that you think are important to have identified or look at opportunities? Okay, we'll give folks a moment. All right, SSSC. I'm wondering if I could ask folks to spell that out a little bit. Wartime NWR, Boy Scouts, Gold Clubs, great. A shoreline program that goes by boat. Okay, we will look into that. Thank you. Many working in the fields, kelp growers, seafood growers, great partners. Okay. Working with local gardeners, setting up local garden beds for community use to learn about environmentally friendly ways to grow and feed families. Suffolk County Community College, Wartime National Wildlife Refuge. Great ideas. Okay, other thoughts? Okay. All right, so with that, oh, we're still getting some comments in. Okay, we'll give folks another couple of seconds to get some additional thoughts in, and then we will move on. Quality parks. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next steps, and for that, I'm going to turn it over to Nora from our team here at MJ Engineering. So Nora, if you would like, please walk us through some of the next steps.
Thank you so much, Jackie, and thank you to all our presenters tonight. So as we mentioned earlier, there is an online questionnaire. This is accessible via desktop or your mobile device. You can either scan the QR code on your screen right now, or you can visit the Town of Brookhaven LWRP webpage. That link is available here at the bottom of your screen, as well as in the chat. And we can share the direct link to the survey with you in just a few moments, the questionnaire with you in just a few moments. It is live now. So for folks who are joining us today on this webinar, if you'd like to, while the ideas are still fresh in your mind, please feel free to directly after this jump onto that questionnaire and share and react. Like mentioned earlier, further detail on each project is available in this questionnaire. And you can react to each proposed project, and as well as there's an opportunity for you to leave further comments or questions or suggestions there. So plenty of space for folks to kind of take some time and think through these proposed projects and react to them. Like I said, the QR code is an easy way to access, and we'll be putting in that direct link to the survey in just a few moments in the chat. So next, in the next steps, our team here is going to be continuing to prepare that LWRP final document that Jackie walked through earlier in the presentation. All of those components need to be completed in order for the town to consider and for New York State Department of State to consider the LWRP complete. So our team, the entire consultant team will be continuing to work through that. Now, as I'm sure we can see in our Q&A box, folks have a number of questions. We appreciate your patience as we've been walking through this presentation. Just as another reminder, I'm going to walk through to post a question using the Q&A function. You just need to locate that button down at the bottom of your screen. And if you'd prefer, you can also raise your hand by using the raise hand feature in the Zoom webinar meeting. If you're joining us via telephone, I don't know that we have anybody right now joining us via telephone, but if anyone hops on via telephone, all you need to do is press *9 to raise your hand and *6 to mute or unmute. So I'm going to take a peek over in the Q&A, and we're going to kind of work our way through these questions. So there was a question about the East Moriches Property Owners Association. And thank you for that, Royal Reynolds. The question, I'm going to kind of summarize here. It's a long one, but just seems like we want to ensure that the Waterfront Advisory Committee is taking a hard look at the issues involving protecting the waterfront buffer areas as they relate to East Moriches. So Alan, I'm going to kind of toss that one over to you. I know that we have been in talks with folks in that area.
Yeah, sure. So the town recognises the importance of protecting the entire South Shore of Long Island, the Bay Shore of Fire Island, and even the Atlantic shoreline of Fire Island. And one of the best ways to do that is to create natural buffers that can hopefully migrate inland with sea level rise. I'm sorry, I don't know the exact report you're talking about. As you can imagine, the town receives hundreds and hundreds of reports every single year. But I'll certainly, after this meeting, I will look into that specific report and I will get back to you.
Great, thank you, Alan. And then we had a question come through, is the landfill within the boundary? Jackie, I'll toss that to you. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and take that. And we do have a couple of questions about the landfill, so we'll kind of group those together. The landfill is not within the waterfront revitalization area boundary that we are examining as part of this process. It is north of Sunrise Highway, so the landfill is not a part of the evaluation for this process. So that's with regard. I think that addresses several landfill related questions.
Great, thank you, Jackie. There is a question about what is meant by the LWRP when it mentions modify local codes. Jackie, I'll send that to you. Maybe Barbara might want to chime in there too.
Yeah, I'll take a first cut, and then certainly Barbara, please feel free to share your thoughts as well. But as we go through this process and identify the proposed projects, and as we're continuing to work through the preparation of the LWRP, it might be identified that there are opportunities to have local laws or regulatory options to be able to help implement and or protect key resources that are identified through this. So that is one piece of it. Another piece, if you recall early on when we were talking about the LWRP process, we talked about an evaluation of consistency of local actions within the waterfront revitalization area with your LWRP. So as part of this process, the town will need to adopt something called the local consistency law. And it is essentially the process to review those local, state and federal actions for consistency with your LWRP. Barbara, I'm going to turn it over to you to also provide your input.
Okay, well, that was a good summary, Jackie. I guess I would just add that you know, they're your local laws, they're local, you know, a town with your own local laws. However, the LWRP, what you propose to do in the LWRP if there's any different land uses proposed that are different than your current zoning, you would need to look into that and see if the zoning needed to be amended to match the types of uses that you're proposing in the vision for your local waterfront program. So that's, you know, as well as that local consistency law, where that becomes a mechanism for implementing the LWRP, a development project that is reviewed for consistency with your LWRP that you've developed and adopted locally and had approved by the state. So yeah, it's making sure the LWRP jibes with the laws that you have in the books and just seeing if any amendments or tweaks need to be made to make sure that happens.
Great, thank you, Barbara, and thank you, Jackie. So I do have a couple of comments in the Q&A that I just want to let you know have been noted. A comment regarding ammonium nitrate fertilizers, and we want to just note that we are considering that and will definitely make sure that mentions of that and other potential pesticides or any other kind of toxins that can be leached or passed on through the air, water, are included in the LWRP and considered. There's another one in regards to wetlands with the same kind of aspect there. Considering wetlands again, there's a comment that we'll note here about restoration rather than just habitat creation. So thank you for that one as well. And then we have another comment here regarding meeting noticing, just making sure that folks have, you know, some folks are hearing about this for the first time. And so I'll send that one over to you, Jackie.
Sure, yeah. Well, first of all, we're glad you're here now.
Yes.
So thank you for joining us. And that's also why we asked early on how you found out about this. It's a very large waterfront revitalization area. You know, as I mentioned, it's over 126, you know, it's just under 126,000 acres that encompasses this area. So it's very large geographically. And so trying to make sure that we're getting the news out to folks that this is happening is something that we're always looking to improve upon. So we would, you know, welcome you to please let your neighbors, your friends, your colleagues know this is going on. You know, let them know there's a project questionnaire so that we can get as much input as possible. So we definitely appreciate you showing up tonight and joining us. And so, yes, we hope that you continue to follow along. And as mentioned in the link that Nora has put into the webinar chat, you can, you know, get up to date and follow along. Materials have been posted on that webpage throughout the duration of the effort so far.
Thank you, Jackie. We do have a question here. How can we incorporate government to make the transition from cesspools to sewer systems? I know that's kind of a broad question. Jackie, I'll send that your way, and then maybe Alan as well.
Yeah, I think if you might have recognized, particularly with some of the expanded explanation that Andrew provided, there are you know, some proposed projects related to incentivizing creative and alternative wastewater systems. So I think that's one way that that as of now is being contemplated to be able to move forward with that. Alan, I didn't know if there was anything else perhaps that you wanted to add to address that.
Yeah, I mean, where possible, the town is obtaining funding to put in sewer systems, but it's a very expensive process. You need many things in your favor for it to go ahead. So we are working closely with other government agencies to make wastewater treatment a far cleaner for the entire south shore of the town. But it's a long, lengthy process.
Great. Okay, thank you, Alan. Thank you, Jackie. Just a comment that we'll note here, kayaking needs destination points. Thank you for that comment. We appreciate that, as well as in-person meetings work better. Thank you for that. We're really glad that you were able to make it here tonight, as Jackie mentioned earlier. And there will be other opportunities as we go forward in person. Another question came through. Will you be working with the local water authority here on Long Island? We have a serious chemical issue here.
So I'll start with that, and then if anyone on the team wants to add, I think part of the development of this LWRP is to kind of identify a waterfront vision and direction forward, and to also identify partners. And also we see some additional partners that have been identified tonight, as well as through the Q&A that's coming in. So I think the bottom line is all of these entities and agencies and departments within kind of the South Shore area are all potential partners, and will all be important to communicate with and partner with to implement the LWRP. I didn't know if anyone else on the team this evening wanted to add anything more to that. Okay. All right, Nora, what else do we have?
Have we been reaching out to any of the local private boatyards and marinas about partnering with ideas? I do know that we do have a representative on the WAC with the marina, with a marina and a boatyard, but Jackie, I'll send that your way, and perhaps Alan as well.
Sure. I think, to implement some of the proposed projects that have been shared and introduced today, that's going to be an important part of that kind of implementation piece. We also would very much like if those potential partners are not aware of what's happening, please help us to let them know so that they can share their thoughts and ideas. But as Nora indicated, we do have a representative from that sector on our Waterfront Advisory Committee.
I would just add that I'm not sure what you mean by that. So maybe if you want to tell us in that questionnaire, expand about what the benefit of the partnerships would be, we could probably learn from you.
Yeah, that's a good point, Andrew. Like, are there more opportunities for education? Are there more opportunities for access? That type of thing. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, it looks like we have another question. There are passive systems used by off-grid homeowners. Has anyone looked at them? Water treatment systems take our drinking water and send it to sea. That must be changed. I think we kind of hit on this a little bit earlier. But
I'll just add to that. So at least the new systems that are going in, the wastewater treatment systems, are cleaning the water a lot better and pumping the water not into the sea, but filtering it through soil, which cleans the water a lot better than pumping it directly into the bays or into the ocean. One of the great things about working and living in the town of Brookhaven, and one of the downsides is there's so many layers of government, and the town works as efficiently as we can with other government entities. And some things that we can take the primary role, and others we let other organizations do that role. And one of which is the waste treatment is mostly handled by the county.
Thank you, Alan. And it looks like we have one more question, kind of related. What about LIPA and PSE&G as partners to move from oil to natural gas for those waterfront communities? Alan, I know you spoke about the programs that were available for wastewater.
Yeah, I think Nora, that's another example of what Nora, what Alan just said in terms of there are some things that are not within the direct control of the town, but again, trying to establish potential lines of communication and partnerships as appropriate is part of what this overall process is hoping to achieve.
All right, well, thank you, Jackie. It looks like all of our Q&As have been answered at this point. I'd just like to note for folks that the Village of Patchogue is hosting an eco fair this weekend on Sunday. And I will be there as a representative for the LWRP project. So if any folks are planning on attending, I'd be happy to meet with you and chat with you about any questions or comments you might have. I'll also have flyers available for folks to take if they'd like to share more with their community about the questionnaire. And please, again, if you'd like to participate in the questionnaire, you can find the link in the chat or at the Brookhaven Local Waterfront Revitalization Program webpage. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Jackie.
Thank you, Nora. And I want to thank everybody who has participated today in the session. We really do appreciate it. As mentioned earlier, this has been recorded and will be available at that link that Nora had just identified on the town web page for this project. So you can certainly go back and listen to that, or let your neighbors and friends and colleagues know if they missed this evening that they can also listen in. So we appreciate that. We really do encourage you to share your additional thoughts and ideas through the online questionnaire. And we look forward to getting your input on that. That's all we have for this evening. We appreciate your time. Alan, if there's any closing remarks, I'd love to turn it over to you.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to all, to the panelists and for those that have joined into this meeting. Like I said at the start, you know, the ultimate goal of this is to make the South Shore a better place to live, work and play. But to succeed, we do need your input. So please provide that after this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good evening, everybody.